Inevitably, a long life can pass by many milestones. My own is no exception.
Nothing lasts forever. For 70 years, it felt like Queen Elizabeth II just might.
Decades of triumph and tragedy, of progress and pain. Her reign was truly remarkable.
I have witnessed the transformation of the international landscape, through which this country must chart its course.
In her time, many leaders came and went. 14 presidents, 15 prime ministers. She was the queen who wouldn't quit.
My lords, pray be seated.
A woman who rose to power in a male-dominated world. Her love for family matched only by her love of country.
The British people can be proud of the part they have played in keeping the spirit alive. I thank you all, and the many others at home and overseas, for your touching messages of great kindness.
She was more than a monarch. The example she set, far greater than the titles she held.
A model of decency and consistency. A reminder that no matter the moment in history, people persist, and compassion is always within reach.
With my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
The story of the longest reigning monarch in British history comes to a close. Queen Elizabeth II died today. She was 96 years old.
She became queen at the age of 25 in 1952. 7 decades later, England and the world are saying goodbye. Her eldest son, Charles III, is the king effective immediately.
Her passing came after a few hours of uncertainty. Her doctor saying this morning he was concerned for her health. A couple hours later, a sign posted outside Buckingham Palace read, "The Queen died peacefully in Balmoral this afternoon."
Hundreds upon hundreds of people gathered outside Buckingham Palace late into the night. They brought flowers, paying their respects to the Queen who served their country for generations.
And though their country is an ocean away, Americans and people around the world feel a connection to the royal family. Some of those connections link to the Triad.
WFMY News 2's Ariel Cadet spoke to people from England who now live here in the Piedmont. They shared what Queen Elizabeth means to them.
News of Queen Elizabeth's passing means the end of an era for Brits now living in the Triad.
I was surprised. It was a little bit sudden for me.
And I kind of lost it, kind of cried a lot.
Joanna Revem was born in England but moved to the States in the 50s with her family. She now lives in Mount Airy. Although she was raised in America, she still feels connected to her British heritage.
There's so much history over centuries of the different ways that the royal family has been involved in regional and national and world events and politics, and they have been pivotal, and they've always been pivotal.
Revem's love for England comes from her family's history and serving it. Her father flew in the Royal Air Force, and her great-aunt was honored by the Queen for starting a school for children in India. She says she got emotional when she heard the news of the Queen's passing.
Because I just want to remember her fondly. She reigned in such an amazing way, just had a real gift of grace, of composure.
Terry Niles shares that same admiration for the Queen.
She ascended to the throne at a very early age and has served faithfully and truthfully through some very difficult times for the country.
He says he had a newfound respect for the monarchy after moving to Greensboro, since the U.S. has nothing like it.
I think coming to the United States, you realize that having a queen or a king, a monarch, is important, because then you have someone who embodies the country and everybody can love and respect.
In Greensboro, Ariel Cadet, WFMY News 2.
Queen Elizabeth II had deep ties to North Carolina's favorite son, the late Reverend Billy Graham. This is a photo of him and his wife, Ruth, with the royal family back in 1984. The Queen is on the far left. She heard one of his sermons on the radio, then invited him to the palace. On the Billy Graham website, there's a big section about their friendship over the years. This photo is from one of their other times they met. Graham once said, "I was always found her very interested in the Bible and its message. After preaching at Windsor one Sunday, I told her I had almost preached on the healing of the crippled man in John chapter 5. Her eyes sparkled and she bubbled over with enthusiasm, as she could do on occasion. 'I wish you had,' she exclaimed. 'That's my favorite story.'" The Queen had several other connections to our state. Ocracoke Island in the Outer Banks has a British cemetery. 37 British Royal Navy sailors died on the HMT Bedfordshire. Every year, the National Park Service, the Coast Guard, and the British Royal Navy honor the sailors. They fly a brand new British flag gifted from the UK. A few miles away on Roanoke Island, they boast the Elizabeth II ship. Is modeled after a 16th century sailing vessel and named after the monarch. Another tribute to the Queen is in Raleigh. A painting of her is on display at the North Carolina Museum of Art. Critics call it a masterful depiction of the formality of the Queen's title, coupled with her down-to-earth love of nature and the land. Just ahead, we dig into one of the best North Carolina connections to the Queen. She was a Tar Heel fan. Inside of her trip at a UNC football game in about 11 minutes.
And check out the crowd that gathered at Buckingham Palace today. People stood outside its gates for hours honoring the Queen's life. They sang their national anthem and placed flowers outside the palace gates. The spectacle was also in the sky. A double rainbow shimmered over Buckingham Palace this afternoon, a symbol for some of her grace and legacy. Other memorials around the UK were more material. The Union Jack was at half-staff over the British Prime Minister's home. It's been an emotional day for all of them.
We are all devastated by the news that we have just heard from Balmoral. The death of Her Majesty the Queen is a huge shock to the nation and to the world. Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built.
And we've all known just one queen. She's the person that we've always looked up to. Somehow. It's just a sad day. Just a very, very sad day.
The UN held a moment of silence in New York City today honoring the Queen's life. In Washington, D.C., visitors placed flowers at a small memorial outside the British Embassy. Flags are at half-staff at the White House and the U.S. Capitol tonight. Today, Governor Cooper ordered flags to fly at half-staff at all government facilities across our state. President Biden visited the British Embassy and wrote a message in a condolence book there. Shortly after, he spoke about the Queen.
I had the opportunity to meet her before she passed, and she was an incredibly gracious and decent woman. And the thoughts and prayers of the American people are with the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth in their grief.
Several of our state lawmakers shared their condolences. Representative Alma Adams wrote, "No statement could do her 7-decade reign justice. Like many Americans, including myself, she drew comfort and strength from her faith in God." Senator Richard Burr wrote, "She will be remembered for a long life dedicated to duty, honor, and service, principles she lived by example." And Governor Cooper said, "Queen Elizabeth led with unparalleled dignity."
Queen Elizabeth's reign saw decades of change. In those 70 years, there were 14 U.S. presidents, 15 U.K. prime ministers, but only one queen. WFMY News 2's Grace Holland talked to Triad experts about her impact across the globe.
Julie, I've seen a lot of people talking today about how hard it is to imagine the UK without Queen Elizabeth, much less to see a king take the throne. But it was very different, a male-dominated world when she became queen all those years ago.
The longest reign in the British monarchy ended.
I can't imagine most of us in a job for 70 years making fewer errors than she did and accomplishing some important things.
Queen Elizabeth left a legacy that political experts like Mark Vail at Wake Forest University and Jerry Pewbanks at UNC Greensboro say few have achieved.
One of the most stable, effective, and ultimately beloved monarchs in British history.
She provided that stability and that long chain from Winston Churchill to new prime minister today.
She was not born to be queen like others in her family. Her uncle gave up the throne to her father, who died when she was 25 years old, making her queen. She took the throne in the early 1950s at a time when women were not often in power and after her country was battered by 2 world wars.
She was also the first female monarch in many centuries, and she was subjected to not a small amount of sexism and even misogyny early in her reign.
But Vail says what set her apart was how she led.
My whole life, whether it be long or short,
inspiring unity,
shall be devoted to your service.
A trait he says impacted people outside of her kingdom.
The idea that we are all in this together is something that Elizabeth was very effective at conveying, and it's something I think from which and about which Americans could learn a lot.
Piedmont says it will make a reign like hers hard to follow.
She was probably the best known woman in the world for the longest period of time.
In Greensboro, Grace Holland, WFMY News 2.
Charles III takes over for the Queen. He is her eldest son. He's the king, effective immediately. A formal coronation likely won't happen for a few months. In a statement today, he wrote, "The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother." After King Charles, Prince William is the next in line for the crown. After him, it's his firstborn son, Prince George, who's 9 years old.
The funeral service will take place at Westminster Abbey in London. It's expected in less than 2 weeks. The exact day will be confirmed by Buckingham Palace. She'll be laid to rest in the King George VI Memorial Chapel.
Want to talk to you a little bit about the triad weather that we're going to see over the next couple of days. First things first, you might not realize if you haven't been out in a while, but it's really cooled down. We have comfortable air back for a little bit. Mid-60s currently. That means we have a long way to go. Here's what I expect for your hometowns by tomorrow morning. It's pretty extreme, down to right around 60 to the north, low 60s elsewhere, which means if you're up early, you'll have that cool, almost fall feel to the air. Now, that won't last all day, of course. We'll warm up a little bit, but it's a low humidity afternoon with highs in the low 80s. Perfect weather for Friday night football. Nothing going on locally, but this is kind of lurking to our south. A good amount of tropical moisture trying to head our way and come up closer for that upcoming weekend. I'm a bit concerned we could have a few rounds of rainfall starting late Saturday morning, lasting really through Sunday as well. Coming up, we'll talk about the soggy weekend ahead and how it could cause some flooding problems in parts of the Carolinas.
We've got new details tonight on the 18-year-old girl who survived a deadly car crash in Randolph County. Highway Patrol says Emily McAllister is at home tonight after spending weeks in the hospital. Troopers say she was driving the car that crashed on Finch Farm Road last month. 18-year-old Sydney Langston died. 2 people in the oncoming car were also hurt. Highway Patrol says a 57-year-old woman is still in the hospital. A 14-year-old girl is back home. Investigators say McAllister was not using her cell phone at the time, but she crossed the center line well before the crash. It's still not clear why.
Days after fights canceled a deadly high school football game at halftime, Guilford County Schools announces it is beefing up security. District leaders say body scanners will be used at all home football games tomorrow. They say GCS was already discussing adding more security before the fights broke out at the deadly game last Friday. They say the move is not a direct response to the fights, which are still under investigation. 1 juvenile was charged.
This week's COVID spread map is looking a lot better. So here is our state's last week map, the map last week. Much of the Triad was in orange, the highest level of spread. Well, here's the new map. A whole lot of green, the lowest level all across the state. Guilford, Randolph, Rockingham, they're all in green. Forsyth County is still in orange. Alamance is in yellow.
The North Wilkesboro Speedway is coming full circle. NASCAR will return to the historic track for the first time in 26 years with the 2023 All-Star Race. Governor Roy Cooper made the big announcement in Raleigh along with NASCAR legend and North Carolina native Dale Earnhardt Jr. This is a major development for a track that sat empty for decades. With help from money from the state, it reopened last month to sold-out crowds. Jr. was there last week. Wilkes County businesses call it a rebirth.
It brings in so many people. It's unbelievable. Like when Earnhardt come last week, it was like, wow, where'd all these people come from? Just to see him is like 1996 all over again.
The All-Star Race weekend is May 19th through the 21st. Tickets go on sale later on this fall. We'll be right back.
Millions of Americans feel a connection to Queen Elizabeth II. In our state, that feeling manifests in football.
The Queen was a Tar Heel fan. She went to a game decades ago. 2 Ones to Know's Ben Briscoe digs into it.
On her first trip to the United States as Queen, Elizabeth II couldn't pass up a chance to see an American football game. On October 19, 1957, she and Prince Philip watched the North Carolina Tar Heels take on the Maryland Terrapins up in College Park. The whole event was a big show, the crowd coming out in their nicest dress, many women even in furs and pearls, large sections of the audience holding up signs to make a Union Jack flag. The team captain for Maryland even got a new front tooth put in after his had been knocked out earlier in the season during a play. In the end, Maryland beat Carolina 21-7. But reports at the time say the Queen cheered on both teams. And she left the game with a special reminder of our state. Then North Carolina Governor Luther Hodges giving the Queen a small trophy of Sir Walter Raleigh. By the way, 65 years later, you can still see the chair the Queen used that day on display at the University of Maryland. A reminder of the time the world's longest sitting monarch enjoyed the same game and even the same team that you and I watch every weekend.
It all comes back to football, doesn't it? Yes, especially this time of year. Hey, right now, feeling a little bit like that football season. Finally, summer takes a while to cool off here in the South. Right now, we're seeing some 60s, which might be a bit temporary. We'll have some mugginess come back our way toward the weekend.